Hello, everyone. This is Greg Muna, aka Master Moo, with another edition of our live stream, live chat, ongoing series of conversations, which so far has been called Music is a Revelation. But I think I'm going to be expanding this beyond just music. I really think that the larger topic is music as an art and art as a revelation. And I think what I was talking about earlier was that our key phrase, and we were quoting Beethoven and other composers, is the idea that music is a revelation of God in sound. And for people who don't want to use theistic language, or for whom there's too much of a heavy baggage in the G word God, we can put that in secular terms, that music is a perceptual microcosm of the macrocosm of the totality of all self-referential information in the entire universe. And that would be a secular paraphrase or rephrasing of the same thing as music is a revelation of God in sound. I realize that whenever anyone uses theological language, it's very emphatic and it may seem aggressive, and it's not. I do not want to be aggressive or to, pull rank or anything like that. But I think it's really important for each of us to be able to synthesize whatever wisdom traditions we've been exposed to in terms of what is meaningful and true in our own lives. And what is meaningful and true in my life as a musician is music, is sound. So what I hear in sound, when I really listen, when I listen without distraction, with complete attention, with complete focus, and complete identification with what's happening in the sound, without spacing out into daydreaming. And this is the key thing, is that when we listen in the right way, in order for music to be a revelation in sound, we cannot subordinate the sound to a background. We cannot make it a soundtrack to our personal drama and think, oh, that reminds me of, blah, 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 some happy or sad event that happened in the past, or some that would be, if it was using it to narrate a happy memory, that would be nostalgia. And if we were using music to narrate a sad memory, that would be regret. Or imagining a future scenario of something we may be anticipating or afraid of, right? A positive anticipation, well, that would be hope. We could use music as a soundtrack to narrate a scenario, a mental fantasy of hope, of being in the future, or a negative fantasy of the future, which would be fear, something, a negative outcome. And actually, music does not really have to do with any of those things, because music is never in the past and it's never in the future. It's always in the present. It's always in the now. And that now includes all of our past and all of our potential future. All of the past and all of the future are unfolding in the present moment. And that may sound like mystical mumbo jumbo, but it's just the truth. You know it. Okay? And we don't need to lie. We're here and we're here to tell the truth. I'm welcoming you all to the chat room. I'm keeping my eyes on the chat room. So any comments that you make, we go live. I'll speak to you live. I'll go through my whole sort of creative and sort of internal psychological process. But as I was talking in previous episodes here of Music is a Revelation, which I'm considering retitling this series Art in general, Art. And if music is a revelation of God in sound, and if we're going to continue to use sort of the theological language, then what is art and what are artists, right? In other words, that's sound. If music is working with our perception, our sense perception of sound, and sense perception not to be confused with a sensuality or a desire, or because that's different, that's libido, right? Sense perception is on that purely preconscious or liminally conscious way, that just immediate perception before any sort of rational thinking, sound as it enters your ear, in the outer ear, and then the inner ear, and gets transformed into neurological impulses in your auditory nerves into your brain, and then the brain creating an image of sound, a sense of hearing from external fluctuations of frequencies of air vibrations, right? Likewise, all of our senses are the immediate translation of external phenomena into neurological electrical impulses in our brains. And this is how we experience our five senses. This is how we experience sound, sight, taste, touch, and smell. There is a physical process taking place in the immediate environment of our bodies, which affects our bodies. In the case of sound, it's vibration in air, air pressure variations, which are internally structured in a way which is cognizable, i.e., that have frequency, duration, and so on. Because without those regular elements of frequency, duration, and so on, we cannot distinguish sound from noise. In order to have a musical experience of sound, it has to be structured. It has to have regularity, it has to have frequency, and if it has frequency, then it can be structured in such a way which is self-referential. And when we can experience self-referential sound, and when we can focus on that, we can experience music. This is what my videos are about, this is what my compositions are about. And when we experience that, the emotion is, to me, the deepest emotion, because that is emotion that is beyond the person having the feeling and the thing that's being felt about. It's pure emotion without the emotional subject, i.e., the person having the feeling, and the emotional object, the thing that the feeling is about. It's emotion that is non-dual. And that's not just in music. That is in every art form. That is in visual art. And visual art includes paint. We'll be talking about visual art and Dharma art and the teachings I received from my teacher, Jigam Trungpa Rinpoche, who taught me Dharma art, visual art, and poetic art. He was a poet. So I talked about that last time on the anniversary of his birth, on the anniversary of his death. His poetic art and his visual art. He was not a musician, but he did teach his students the significance of listening and sound. And if we have time today, after our main talk today, after our main subject, we'll look at the idea of Kunstreligion, Dharma art, poetics, and sound, which is to say the sound aspect of words, not simply the semantic or dictionary meaning of words. So not simply like the signification, the meaning, right? But the experience of sound, which is above and beyond what it means in the dictionary. And great literature brings both of those elements together, both the literal meaning of the word and the experience of the sounds of the words, the sounds and the rhythms. In the language of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, that is what he calls mantra, the sound, just relating to pure like consonants and vowels and rhythms of speech without any sort of objective reference, but just the energy of vowels, the energy of consonants, the energy of stressed and unstressed syllables. And that's the essence of poetics. And literature, the essence of literature is poetry. Poetry opens up all of literature. So by reading and engaging with and analyzing and interpreting and evaluating poetry, we can open up all of literature. The skills that we get from carefully focusing our attention on poetry extend to all of literature, to fiction and to drama. So, when we are really reading fiction, we are reading fiction with the same skill set that we use to read poetry. And when we are really reading drama, or when we are really experiencing drama, either on the page or more really experiencing it in live performance, we're bringing into the live performance our ability to analyze poetry, our ability to analyze fiction, and it's all happening in real time in an audio-visual presentation with gesture and sound and all of the 6 essential elements of drama as outlined by Aristotle in his Poetics. And we'll come back to Aristotle's Poetics in the future, but just for reference, when we're talking about drama, we're talking about mythos, which is plot, ethos, which is characterization. We are talking about dianoia, theme, relevant theme. We are talking about lexis, which is memorable language, diction, tone, the use of language, all right, the poetic text. And we are talking audiovisually opsis, the spectacle, what we see, and melos, the sound design of what we hear, which is beyond simply the voices or the words, but the sounds, the sound effects, the background music, the whole sound world. And those, according to Aristotle and his Poetics, those are the 6 essential elements of drama. And furthermore, Aristotle specifies that each of these elements must be a complete entity in and of itself. That in a successful drama, plot, characterization, the theme, the spectacle, the diction, and the sound, each has its own arc and is a complete artwork in and of itself. And then these 6 layers come together to create the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total artwork, which is drama itself. We're coming back to the theme of drama as art later this week, because preview, this is April is Poetry Month. And why is April Poetry Month? Well, there are several reasons. There are many great poems about April, such as the Canterbury Tales of, we can, Chaucer and the Wasteland, for example, of T.S. Eliot, and plenty of smaller lyric poems like the An April Sunday Brings the Snow by Philip Larkin, another great April poem. But beyond that, why April? Because April 23rd, which is coming up this Wednesday, is the traditional birthday of the greatest figure in English literature, William Shakespeare. Traditionally, his birth and death are celebrated on April 23rd. We don't have exact records because of, pre-modern record keeping. And in England, it's conflated with St. George's Day. But we use April 23rd as a day to celebrate the unique achievement, the dual colossus that is Shakespeare, both as the greatest poet and the greatest dramatist. So we will be coming back to Shakespeare and the meaning of Shakespeare. But today, since we're getting ready for that, and we're preparing for that, and because we are in April Poetry Month, I want to talk about poetry today. Poetry as an art. Poetry that is a revelation. Poetry that is a revelation of God in the word, in the sound of the word. And of course, words are audiovisual. There are the words, which are the sounds of one's voice when one reads, and there are words on the paper. So that, when we speak poetry, when we read poetry out loud, it is an auditory art form. But when we silently read poetry on the page, it is a visual art. So poetry brings together both visual art and auditory art. But of those two, the auditory is more important because we cannot actually completely comprehend any poem unless we read it out loud. It's never fully embodied on the page alone. And you know that. Everyone knows that. I'm checking the comments, so if there are any comments, please come right in. And so today, again, what we're doing is that we're extending the idea of music as a revelation, or music as a revelation of God, to not just the perception of sound, but to all five senses. So we're looking at sound, smell, taste, touch. What did I leave out? Sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And I don't have that much that I can share with you when it comes to taste, smell, and touch. I mean, the artists of smell are the great parfumiers or the great makers of incense. I'm not a parfum. I don't have any expertise or skill or even any particular gift with which to share with you, except my own appreciation for fine fragrance or fine perfumes, the same as anyone else. Likewise, when it comes to taste, I'm not an artisan. I'm not an artist of taste. I am not a great chef. Those are the great chefs, the great cooks. I'm a strictly mediocre cook. I mean, I can just throw together some eggs or salad or something. That's about the extent of it. I completely venerate those great masters and mistresses of the culinary arts, who are able to create artwork in the sense of taste, who are able to take you on journeys strictly through that. Although, obviously, in the same way that poetry combines visual and artistic, and the same way that theater combines the visual and sound, right? Cooking combines also taste with fragrance, because you can't have delicious food without some sort of smell as well. So fragrance is part of it. It's secondary to the primary thing of taste. And then, likewise, I have no special skill. I have no special gift when it comes to since tactility, other than the basic hand-eye coordination involved in playing a musical instrument, piano, percussion, string instruments that I've played. I have no particular tactile skill. The great artists of touch would be for example, the couturiers, people who make clothing that feels so good on the body, where simply the texture and the feel of it makes you feel ennobled and makes you in touch with your best possible self. Those are the great artisans of tactility. You could also include sculpture in the sense of a tactile art if you touch it. If it's a touchable sculpture, we can't always touch sculptures, particularly in gallery or museum settings. But if you are making sculpture, if you are a plastic artist, if you make sculpture, or if you are a ceramicist, the feel of it is an important element. It's not just visual; it is tactile as well. So those are all. But the art forms that I have an affinity for, and that I have an ability to speak about, and that I have some training in, that I can share with you, are primarily sound art, and to a lesser extent, the literary art. I'm certainly not a gifted visual artist. I am, in order for me to create visual artworks in an oscilloscope, I have to use software which is created by other people. I didn't create that software myself. So if there is a good visual art accompaniment to my musical compositions, that's only partially my input. It has a lot to do with the nature of the software, which is the interface, or which is the intermediary translation of that. But like Aristotle, I believe that all of these things need to go together, that even if one thing is predominant. Okay? So, all of that was a big sort of introduction to today's subject of poetry. And so my tentative title for this next series of talks, and I may even switch the title of this series of talks from, I said, our current title is Music is a Revelation, but if I'm not just talking about music, but of the sense perceptions altogether, and developing a sacred, non-dual relationship to our sense perceptions, to our hearing of sound, our visual perception of sight, smell, taste, and touch. These understood on the sensory level, not on a libidinal level, or even on an emotional level, or on a rational level, but strictly on that sort of preconscious, immediate, unmediated sensory thing. Then I would say art is the church. Yes, art is the church of God. And which aspect of God? God the Creator. So I would say art is the church of God the Creator. And artists are the preachers, are the priests of God the Creator. And artistic receivers, people who appreciate and experience art in its true sense, in its non-dual sense, who open up their sense perceptions without subject and object, those are lovers of art, are the disciples of God the Creator. And what is the reward? The reward is beauty. when we experience our sense perceptions without subject and without object in a state of complete, selfless, one-pointed concentration and attention. In that sort of loving humility, the experience is beauty. The experience of sound, of sight, of smell, of taste, of touch, in complete concentration and complete attention, without separating the experience into subject and object, without separating it in time from, without going into the past, without going into the future, but staying completely in the present. The nature of our true perceptions is beauty. And this teaching came to me from many teachers, not just from Trungpa Rinpoche, but a teacher who I want to honor today. It's not a birthday or a commemoration of his death, but a teacher who died a few years ago, but who I had the great pleasure of encountering as a teacher over the years, was the great Harold Bloom. And he lived a long life, a long, great, productive, extremely productive life. He died in 2019 at the age of 89. He was born in 1930 in New York City, and most of his life he taught at Yale. And he was endlessly prolific. He wrote more than 50 books, 40 books of literary criticism, books of philosophy, translated into many languages, a great lover of the canon. And he opened up literature on a much deeper level for me. For him, great literature is wisdom literature. So he read Shakespeare and his favorite poems the same way that a religious person would read a holy scripture, as a source of profound truth of what it means to be a human being. And I'm sure that has to do with his early training, because English was not his first language. He was born in New York and raised in the Bronx in an Orthodox Jewish Yiddish-speaking household. And his first language was Yiddish and literary Hebrew. He didn't learn English until he started attending public schools after the age of 6. And his parents were pretty poor, immigrants, garment workers, homemakers, and he just was brilliant and a polymath and taught everything and memorized everything. He discovered poetry in the libraries, he memorized it, he loved it, and he was able to recite all of the great poems from memory. And this is what he did in lectures, and his lectures were brilliant improvisations. And he was very affectionate. If you loved literature the way he did, he embraced you as a lover. Oh, my dear, he would hug you, and he was so affectionate and so warm. And that's one thing I loved about him: his complete lack of boundary and his warmth and his friendliness. I really resent people who have misinterpreted that. But I don't want to get into any negatives on others. I just simply want to appreciate him for the great teacher he was. He continued teaching until just days before he died in 2019. And he was a great lecturer on everything, on Shakespeare and so on, but the Romantics and everything that came out of Romanticism, he opened up deep levels of understanding. And particularly for me, Harold Bloom opened up deeper levels of meaning into the poetry that I already loved of Wallace Stevens, the great American poet. So Harold Bloom Wallace Stevens, you probably all know Wallace Stevens, and I don't need to give you his biography, but he lived from 1879 to 1955. He also, lived a good, productive, long life. Wallace Stevens was not a professor. He was offered professorships. He turned it down. He was a successful insurance executive. He was a poet, a lawyer, and an insurance executive. And I discovered his poetry in middle school and continued to study with teachers later, such as Harold Bloom. And as far as I'm concerned, the greatest American poet who translated the vision of 19th century Romanticism into the entirely new language of poetic modernism. So the great modernist, but carrying forward the romantic vision of the earlier romantics of Wordsworth and Whitman and so on, and who combined their sense of nature mysticism with a modernistic visual and symbolic sense, which is influenced by haiku and classical Asian poetic traditions, which were important not only to Wallace Stevens but to his contemporaries Ezra Pound and William Carlos Williams and so on, sometimes known as the Imagists. But Wallace Stevens was not an Imagist. He used some of the techniques of Imagism, which he combined in his own unique philosophical form. He connects Imagism, 20th century Imagism, to 19th century Romanticism, particularly the sense of nature worship, finding God in nature, which we find in Whitman and Wordsworth. And that goes back deeper to philosophical speculation on the nature of reality itself, what it is that's underneath nature. And that connects him all the way back to the metaphysical poets of the 17th century, to George Herbert, John Donne, and so on. So the ultimate source, everything comes from Shakespeare, because Donne and Herbert, of course, their metaphysical poetry emerges out of the incredible expansion of poetic expression of William Shakespeare, in the sonnets in particular, but also in his poetic verse. So, that was all a gigantic introduction to one poem, which I would like to read for you today. It's appropriate for today and even more appropriate for tomorrow. And it's called Sunday Morning. It was published partially, the first version of it, the incomplete version, was published in 1915. The full version in 1923. It's now in the public domain, so I can read it, and it's in the public domain. And it was conceived of during the height of World War I, and it was completed in the aftermath of World War I. But it is not a war poem. But it does look at violence and destruction from a distant perspective. The speaker in the poem is in a safe, peaceful place. The speaker of the poem, the central figure of the poem, is a woman on a Sunday morning, enjoying her peaceful Sunday morning. She's sleeping in, she's having her late breakfast, she's having her coffee and her oranges, and she's wearing a nice nightgown, and she's comfortable in her bed, and she's sitting in a chair, and there's sun coming through the window, and there's a nice rug that has an attractive pattern of a green cockatoo, and she sort of nods off, and she goes through a series of philosophical half-awake, half-asleep dreams in which she considers different aspects of her Sunday morning, whether it's better to simply be peaceful and to enjoy what life gives you, for example, at home, or whether it's necessary to yank oneself out, into some sort of sacrificial, self-sacrificing religious observance. So the themes of the poem are Sunday morning and the individual relationship to it, and sacrifice, and the specific sort of sacrifice that she's referencing on Sunday morning is, she talks about silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and sepulchre, and she's thinking of the sacrifice of Jesus, which is commemorated every Sunday morning, but especially on Easter Sunday morning. So I think this poem Sunday morning is valuable every morning. I think it's especially valuable every Sunday morning. But I think it is most valuable and hit me like a ton of bricks when I was a kid in relation to how we as individuals relate in our society to Easter Sunday. So it's never exactly specified, but I really think the true subject of the poem is Easter Sunday, seen from the perspective of someone who would rather stay in bed and who's sort of daydreaming. So, that being said, let's get right into it. And this is a poem that changed my life. I read it, and my life was changed forever. And maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, that's for you to judge. Okay? Let me read it one section at a time. And it's in stanzas of blank verse, unrhymed blank verse, meaning sort of iambic pentameter without any regular rhymes. There are some rhymes in the internal, but they're not any sort of regularly appearing. And then it's organized into blocks of 15 lines each, which are similar to sonnets, but not really sonnets. You can think of it as a kind of an irregular sonnet sequence because each section has a specific focus. So, let's go. Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens. Complacencies of the peignoir and late coffee and oranges in a sunny chair, and the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug mingle to dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice. She dreams a little, and she feels the dark encroachment of that old catastrophe as a calm darkens among water lights. The pungent oranges and bright green wings seem things in some procession of the dead, winding across wide water without sound. The day is like wide water without sound, stilled for the passing of her dreaming feet over the seas to silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and sepulchre. 2. Why should she give her bounty to the dead? What is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and in dreams? Shall she not find in comforts of the sun, in pungent fruit and bright green wings, or else in any balm or beauty of the earth, things to be cherished like the thought of heaven? Divinity must live within herself. Passions of rain or moods in falling snow, grievings in loneliness, or unsubdued elations when the forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights, all pleasures and all pains, remembering the bough of summer and the winter branch. These are the measures destined for her soul. Jove in the clouds had his inhuman birth. No mother suckled him, no sweet land gave large-mannered motions to his mythy mind. He moved among us as a muttering king, magnificent would move among his hinds until our blood commingling virginal with heaven brought such requital to desire, the very hinds discerned it in a star. Shall our blood fail, or shall it come to be the blood of paradise, and shall the earth seem all of paradise that we shall know? The sky will be much friendlier then than now, a part of labor and a part of pain, and next in glory to enduring love, not this dividing and indifferent blue. She says, I am content when wakened birds, before they fly, test the reality of misty fields by their sweet questionings. But when the birds are gone, and their warm fields return no more, where, then, is paradise? There is not any haunt of prophecy, nor any old chimera of the grave, neither the golden underground, nor isle melodious where spirits gat them home, nor visionary south, nor cloudy palm remote on heaven's hill that has endured as April's green endures, or will endure, like her remembrance of awakened birds, or her desire for June and evening tipped by the consummation of the swallow's wings. She says, but in contentment I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. Death is the mother of beauty, hence from her alone shall come fulfillment to our dreams and our desires. Although she strews the leaves of sure obliteration on our paths, the path sick sorrow took, the many paths where triumph rang its brassy phrase or love whispered a little out of tenderness, she makes the willow shiver in the sun for maidens who were wont to gaze upon the grass relinquished to their feet. She causes boys to pile new plums and pears on disregarded plate. The maidens taste and stray impassioned in the littering leaves. Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? Or do the boughs hang always heavy in that perfect sky, unchanging, yet so like our perishing earth, with rivers like our own that seek for seas they never find, the same receding shores that never touch with inarticulate pang? Why set the pear upon those river banks, or spice the shores with odors of the plum? Alas, that they should wear our colors there, the silken weavings of our afternoons, and pick the strings of our insipid lutes. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical, within whose burning bosom we devise our earthly mothers waiting sleeplessly. Supple and turbulent, a ring of men shall chant in orgy on a summer morn their boisterous devotion to the sun, not as a god, but as a god might be, naked among them like a savage source. Their chant shall be a chant of paradise out of their blood, returning to the sky, and in their chant shall enter, voice by voice, the windy lake wherein their Lord delights, the trees like seraphim and echoing hills that choir among themselves long afterward. They shall know well the heavenly fellowship of men that perish and of summer morn, and whence they came and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. She hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, "The tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering. It is the grave of Jesus where he lay." We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water inescapable. Deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky, at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. Let's just take a moment and let the sounds of the words just sink in, and just experience from it how we are feeling with the sounds of poetry as sound art before we examine any of the specific textual meanings of the words. But what's going on here in this poem? Complacencies of the peignoir. A peignoir is an elegant nightgown, and coffee and oranges in a sunny chair. So sort of complacency, taking it slow, and lazy enjoyment. Wearing a nice nightgown. The woman, the speaker of the poem, is enjoying late coffee and oranges in a sunny chair. She hasn't gotten up early, but she's, the sun is up and she's enjoying it. And there's the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug. She has a rug that has a sort of a tropical bird theme on it, and she's just sort of enjoying the colors there, the green, image there. It says, the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug mingle to dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice. So all of these things mingle, all of these things come together. The comfort of sitting in the chair, the feeling of the sun, the nice coffee, the taste of coffee, the taste of the oranges, the nice image of the bird, the tactile sensation of the peignoir, of the elegant bedclothes that she's wearing, her nightgown. So we have sort of taste, touch, smell, the five senses, right? These things mingle to dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice. And of course, these things come together and they dispel the holy hush of ancient sacrifice, which is what? Church attendance. In other words, she is at home enjoying her late coffee and oranges. She didn't get up early and get dressed. She's still undressed. She didn't go off to church. Many of us will be getting up and going off to church tomorrow. I will. I'll be getting up early and putting on. So that's sort of a paradoxical take. All right. But she's staying at home. And mingle to dissipate, of course, has a double meaning. Mingle like single, mingle, and dissipate, getting a little loose, So there's a slightly romantic or erotic suggestion there, So this gives us the feeling that the speaker is a young, attractive woman who is perhaps in a relationship, who perhaps has a partner who later in the poem we can assume is a male partner from the descriptions of men in the poem, who is not with her at the moment, but who she is thinking about, in a positive sense, in a romantic and erotic sense. And the holy hush of ancient sacrifice being the idea of the silence of a traditional church service, particularly in the sort of northern Protestant tradition. I realize that not every church service is holy hush or silent, as he says, silent, though, or without sound. You can go to other churches, mega churches, and there's loud music playing, or traditional churches, the black churches with tambourines and stuff like that. But the church that she's describing here is one that is very quiet and has the holy hush of ancient sacrifice. And of course, the ancient sacrifice is the reenactment of the Eucharist, of the death of Christ, and the reenactment of the Last Supper, the bread and the wine. But instead of getting up to go with the edge, says she dreams a little, and she feels the dark encroachment of that old catastrophe. So instead of getting up to go to church, she sort of sits back in her chair because of her complacency, right? And she, obviously the part of her that wants to stay home and enjoy the morning has won out, but part of her subconscious mind, is feeling guilty that she isn't going to church. So she feels the dark encroachment of that old catastrophe, and catastrophe here is referring to the crucifixion and the death of Christ, and the Greek word is deliberate because catastrophe in modern English means the final action of a tragedy. So thinking of the death, the crucifixion and the death of Christ as a catastrophe, the murder of the great teacher. And as calm darkens among water lights, the pungent oranges and bright green wings seem things in some procession of the dead. So the calm that darkens among water lights is her state of mind as she's falling back asleep. So the things in her room, the oranges and the coffee on the table, and the bright green wings of the pattern on the rug, these sort of are all mixing together and sort of drifting off into her dream state. And she sees, it feels like this is a procession of the dead going into the past, winding across wide water without sound. The day is like wide water without sound. And what is the wide water? That is the ancient Greek river of oblivion, which separates the world of the living and the world of the dead, from which the procession of the dead would have to go over. Stilled for her passing feet, stilled for the passing of her dreaming feet. So now she's in the chair and she's dreaming, but she imagines that the rug has turned into this water, this wide water separating the world of the living from the world of the dead. And where is that taking her? It says, over the seas to silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and sepulchre. And why is Palestine dominion of the blood and sepulchre? For two reasons. Is that Palestine in the past, in the procession of the dead, going back 2,000 years, was the place where the blood was the place of the blood of Christ, and the sepulcher, his place of his entombment, right? But if it's a procession of the dead connecting the dead of the past 2,000 years to the present, then it's the continuation of the blood and the sepulcher, the continuation of the violence and the blood and the killing, which has been going on nonstop in Palestine for the past 2,000 years of religious violence. And it's silent, meaning it doesn't speak to her. And she's just stuck with the silence of the awareness of the dominion of the blood and sepulcher. And that leads her to her first question, that in her dreaming state, that she's forming these words in her mind. She says in her dream, why should she give her bounty to the dead? What is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and dreams? She doesn't, the dead do not speak to her. The dead are silent to her. And, all she gets from religion, from organized religion, what is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and dreams? If it only just, visions and silence. And if she never hears directly the voice of divinity, she never directly hears the voice of God, right? Why should she sacrifice her youth, her beauty, her eros, her life, her pleasure to that? Shall she not find in comforts of the sun, and pungent fruit and bright green wings, or else in any balm of beauty of the earth, things to be cherished like the thought of heaven? All right, so she finds all of this. She finds heaven in her bedroom right now, in her chair with her oranges and her coffee and her physical sense of embodiment. Divinity must live within herself. Passions of rain or moods of falling snow. She identifies herself with the moods of nature. Again, the nature imagery and the symbolism is very similar to the nature imagery and symbolism in haiku, but the blank verse is definitely metaphysical, Shakespearean, Miltonic, Wordsworthian, Whitman-esque, is definitely sort of metaphysical and romantic, and ultimately Shakespearean. And these are the bough of summer and the winter branch. These are the measures destined for her soul. So she relates to the seasons and to the natural flow of things, which leads her to a pagan perspective of a nature, a pre-Christian sense of what it was like to live in a society, a pre-Christian society of worshiping embodiments of nature. And in part 3, she focuses on the image of Zeus or Jupiter. She says Jove in the clouds had his inhuman birth. And Stevens, I think, very cleverly uses Jove, the nickname for Jupiter, because it also can be a stand-in for the Father Jehovah, and the idea that humans can interact with God and to create a demigod. Because she says here, until our blood commingling virginal with heaven brought such requital to desire that the very hinds assigned it in a star. So this is obviously a reference to Virgin Mary and to Jesus as the God-man, as the sort of the demigod. Yeah. And so this is, she considers the pre-Christian origins of Christian mythos in the idea of Jupiter as the father of demigods. And she considers that. But then in part 4, she says she doesn't even need paganism. She says, and again, this is her voice speaking in the dream, I am content when wakened birds before they fly test the reality of misty fields by their sweet questioning. But when the birds are gone and their warm fields return no more, where then is paradise? Okay, so for her, there's paradise in the the fullness of nature in springtime and birds. But when the birds are gone, where is paradise? Can she experiences paradise in springtime, in April, in spring, etc. But what about in the winter? What about when the birds are gone? And there's nothing will endure as April greens endures, or will endured, like her remembrance of wakened birds, or her desire for June, tipped by the consummation of the swallow's wings. And consummation here has a strongly sexual suggestion, right? So again, the imagery of the birds, which began with the image of the fantastical cockatoo upon the rug, is now in her dream state becoming the birds of the fields and the birds of the seasons, and how she relates to them, how that's an image of contentment for her. But she says, and part 5, but in contentment, I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. So this is the human desire for not only to have contentment in this life, but to have contentment in the afterlife. The idea of, and she then goes back and visualizes the Christian eternity, the Christian afterlife, and in part 5, and she considers how the fact that we don't live forever drives the reproductive urge to have children and to perpetuate, so that some part of us lives beyond us. So it says, she causes boys to pile new plums and pears on disregarded plate, the maiden's taste and stray impassioned in the littering leaves, sexual initiation and reproduction. And then in part 6, she considers the idea of Christian paradise. Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? But she rejects it. She says, alas, that they should wear our colors there, the silken weavings of our afternoons, and pick the strings of our insipid lutes. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical. It says, within whose burning bosom we devise our earthly mothers, waiting sleeplessly. So what she's articulating here is a more of a Buddhist sense of reincarnation, that death is the stage, is the intermediate stage between life and rebirth. She returns to her sense of her womanhood and her erotic identity in part 7, when she has this very sexual image of suppular and turbulent, a ring of men shall chant an orgy on summer morn. She's experiencing erotic desire here for her partner, unnamed, or could be her husband or fiance or boyfriend, who is not with her, who could be overseas, who could be in silent Palestine, he could be in the army, World War I, he could be, and this is, so it's a very martial, it's like a military, so it suggests that, it says, their chant shall enter a voice by voice. It says here, they shall know the heavenly fellowship of men that perish and of summer morn. So it's erotic, but it's also an image of male military virility that's very attractive to her in part 7. Finally, in part 8, as she wakes up from her dream, she finally hears a voice that answers her questions. She hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, the tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering, it is the grave of Jesus where he lay. So paradoxically, she has a supernatural experience. She hears the voice of divinity. It's no longer silent, but what does that voice of divinity tell her? It tells her the tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering, it is the grave of Jesus where he lay. So what she's getting from the voice of God is that Jesus was a human being who suffered and who died and who is not resurrected, who is not in heaven, who is not her eternal Savior. So finally, she says, we live in an old chaos of the sun. Again, chaos. This is from the Greek theogony of Hesiod. We emerged out of chaos, and we live in this sort of random quantum fluctuation of particles emerging out of the sun in the solar system, or old dependency of day and night, the endless alternation of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water, inescapable. The island solitude is that we are surrounded by the water which separates life from death. We are unsponsored. We do not have a divine sponsor. We are free to make our own decisions in our lives. But of that wide water of the divide between life and death, that is inescapable. But deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky, at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. We do not need all of this civilizational cultivation of the oranges and the coffee and the weaving of the carpet. All of this beauty exists within nature. Deer walk upon our mountains, the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries, sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, right? And we don't need the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug, because we have at evening casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink. We can just look into the sunset and see pigeons flapping their wings, and we can't tell if they're going up or going down, but they're gradually sinking downward to darkness on extended wings. So that leaves us in a place which is both exalted and desolate. We're alone, we have island solitude, unsponsored, but we are free of that wide water, inescapable. This is a poem that changed my life. When I read it, it made me confront issues of faith that I was struggling with, and it made me confront and look at that, and the tangible way that it changed my life is that I realized I had to leave the church. That was in middle school. That was a long time ago. And that's paradoxical, because I mentioned that I will actually be attending an Easter Sunday service tomorrow morning. So I guess I'm an old reprobate or an apostasy, but to be continued. For Harold Bloom, the poetry of Wallace Stevens was wisdom literature, and that we should read the great poems of Wallace Stevens, the great poems of Shakespeare, the same way we read the Bible or the Torah or anything else that gives us deep, profound insight into life. This is a poem that functioned this way for me, and which is further opened up by my teachers, connecting back to them, and I wanted to thank them, as I did Ginsberg and so on, and I want to dedicate today's talk to the memory of Harold Bloom, who died in 2019. And I want to expand our conversation of Dharma, art, and Kunstreligion beyond music. Beyond music is a revelation of God and sound, to art. Art is the church of God, the Creator. Well, this is Greg Muna, aka Master Moo, wishing you a joyful Easter Sunday weekend.